I saw a study the other day that was talking about capabilities of AI doubling 3 or 4 times a year. And you certainly
Wow.
see with OpenAI and Anthropic and Google's Gemini and what Meta is doing and what X is doing with Grok. They're leapfrogging each other. It seems like monthly, right? So if you're not in front of it and at least understand enough to drive you had innovation and the changes in the business in 1 year or in 18 months, you could be 3 or 4 or 5 kind of generations in AI behind the more modern, fast paced movers. Right? And that's it's a deficit that would be really hard to catch up.
Welcome to Podcast Wise Perspectives, Cybersecurity, and AI. In an era where AI capability is doubling every few months, the question isn't whether to adopt AI, but whether your organization can survive without it. Navigating this velocity requires more than technical skill. It demands strategic foresight and cultural evolution. Today, we are joined by a leader who embodies this blend of technical mastery and authentic, human-centered leadership, Neil D. Morris. As the head of IT at Redaptive Inc. and a former transformational executive across aerospace, defense, and telecommunications, Neil has led digital change and massive M&A integrations for organizations like Ball Aerospace and Maxar Technologies, managing budgets exceeding $80 million. With deep expertise in AI strategy, cybersecurity governance, and IT/OT convergence, Neil has delivered millions in savings and architected solutions that transform how global businesses operate. In this episode, Neil tackles the single biggest strategic risk facing the C-suite today, the 18-month irrelevance threat posed by AI velocity. He'll share his slow-to-flow, speed-to-power framework, a martial arts principle he applies to de-risk AI adoption, reposition IT as a true growth engine, and successfully articulate the long-term value of innovation to a quarterly focused board. Get ready to gain an executable roadmap for AI implementation that prioritizes both speed and safety. All right, let's get started. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Hey, Neil.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing well.
Awesome. So let's do a little bit of icebreaker. On a recent LinkedIn post, you had something in reference of the AI leadership navigator.
Yeah,
The term navigator implies avoiding traps, right? For the C-suite, what is the most significant strategic iceberg? The risk that isn't immediately visible that they must consider navigating around when they're doing the initial AI implementation.
I think there's actually a few of them, right? There's certainly right now when you look at the AI laws, I'm in Colorado, you look at State Bill 205, which is a Colorado AI bill. You look at existing legislation being proposed in California is going in and applying AI without an understanding of the regulatory requirements that are going to be applied to AI is certainly one area where we need to be concerned. I wouldn't say it's a stopper or it would prevent people from deploying AI, but it's certainly one of those things that we need to keep our eyes on because we don't want to get into a spot where we could have some of those massive fines. I think the AI Act proposes $40 million euro um, fee potential, which could be devastating to certain businesses. The others is just alignment, right? We can spend a lot of time buying tools, right? Training people, just to have those companies gobbled up as you start to see consolidation of different companies, because there's always a new AI company coming out, and there's going to be some market correction there. So understanding kind of the landscape and what really the business output you're trying to get from the tool, or else you end up wasting a lot of time, energy, and money building tools and solutions that are really seeking a problem and not solving it.
Yeah. Now, what what do you think? Which AI? So there's so many AI implementation that you can apply to a business. What do you think is the most? What is the most the application of AI that is being used now? That you believe that is like every business wants it. Like all the CEOs you're talking to, they're like, I want this AI thing to implement in my business.
Yeah, I think when I think of different places where you can apply AI in an organization, by avoiding a lot of potential risk and overinvestment, legal certainly comes to mind. right? I think every company that engages with another company, very standard process is you're putting in place a mutual NDA, initial terms reviews, and those can be very algorithmic, right? You can explain to an AI tool, talking generative AI specifically, like the terms and conditions that your organization will or will not accept, right? And most of the time, there's a handful of red lines that go back and forth on some of those, and that can be done quickly with AI. I think accounting practices, right? You see all the double match and triple match invoices to POs, right? Which is a more standard computer vision, following up on invoices that get sent out. There's a lot of different areas, but I'd say for me, I would stay in the core kind of operations of functionality that the business is doing. You can certainly see some massive returns and results in different groups have call centers or inventory management and those. But as you start to move AI more into customer touch, you definitely enhance the risk or increase the risk that the company takes on. And you have to be more careful with those. If you have human in the loops and you're automating more internal operations, you can learn a lot in those early AI pilots as they go into production, and really see some value. And tracking that value is really critical because I think there's a lot of AI implementations that I see that people do them quickly. They see some incremental improvement, but not worth the effort and the investment that people are putting in them. I also
Mhm.
think as AI evolves, we'll see a lot more purpose built small language models and fit for purpose tools that will allow you to take AI into different areas of the business and a lot more efficient.
Okay. Now, in the drive for efficiency and automation, where is the line between optimizing a process with technology and preserving the essential human element that drives innovation and strategic thinking?
I mean, I think that line can go you at a few different places depending on the type of business that you're running and really how you're differentiating yourself. I tell people that you had anything that can be very algorithmic, very repeatable, like you can explain it easily to someone that does not come from that business, how to do it. It can be automated with AI, and those are generally really commodity kind of tasks. I think when you start thinking about how do you really solve problems for your customers, how do you really add value to their lives or improve how they show up, and those really high customer touch kind of scenarios is definitely where more strategy and you can come up with some unique ways to drive value from the business. Definitely need to stay more human centric. And then I think you'll start to see people willing to pay for those more human experiences, even where AI can take over in certain areas. So it really depends on what part of the market you're going after. You had high volume commodity kind of items. I think you can push a lot further into that stack and leverage AI even more into how you differentiate and build strategy. If you're looking at more items or looking to build a brand more around that human centric high touch, then obviously you'll use a lot less AI in the day-to-day interactions with those customers, but still be able to use it for inventory management, and different areas that are just very algorithmic in nature.
Okay. For a board focus on a quarter to quarter efficiency, how do you successfully articulate the long term strategic value of funding innovation projects with uncertain immediate or ROI?
Yeah, I think when you're talking to different boards or board members about AI, it reminds me a lot about early days of speaking with boards about cybersecurity.
Uh-huh.
Cybersecurity, there's not really a direct path, right, to revenue unless your business is built around cybersecurity. So it's risk mitigation, it's building customer trust and confidence, it's doing the right thing for your customers long term. I think AI is going to impact about every facet of people's lives. And
Uh-huh.
if we don't take action now, right, and don't start leveraging it, don't start using it, don't start understanding it, we have a real liability of becoming irrelevant as an organization, right? So seeing the risk associated with not leveraging AI, I think is one angle. The other is looking at what capabilities you're building, right? I've been posting and chatting a lot about how do you get alignment, right, at the executive, at the boards, right, on the projects and programs that you're taking on and how you're doing that experimentation, you'll kill a lot of AI projects and programs because they won't show the results that you anticipate. But until you get in there and start to experiment with them, it's hard to understand. And as you're experimenting, you're building capability of how the tools work, how you interact with them. And it informs you as a board of how much risk or how much potential there is in the business. But it's moving so quickly. It's one of those where you have to kind of learn as you iterate through it.
Mm.
So you need to carve off a reasonable size investment that aligns with the strategy of the business. But if you don't, you risk really being disrupted by a market that's going to be disrupted by AI and people that are going to come and eat our lunch.
Yikes. Yeah, so basically be prepared, learn fast, keep yourself on your toes is what
Yep,
AI is.
absolutely. I saw a study the other day that was talking about capabilities of AI doubling 3 or 4 times a year. And you certainly see with OpenAI and Anthropic and Google's Gemini and what Meta is doing and what X is doing with Grok. They're leapfrogging each other. It seems like monthly, right? So if you're not in front of it and at least understand enough to drive you had innovation and the changes in the business in 1 year or in 18 months, you could be 3 or 4 or 5 kind of generations in AI behind the more modern, fast paced movers, right? And that's it's a deficit that would be really hard to catch up.
Yeah, totally. Like even using Gemini as just for fun, maybe every 2 or 3 weeks or so, there's a new feature, right?
Absolutely.
I'm like, I
So
can do this now?
Anthropic just came out with the idea of skills, right? Which is a new even kind of concept on top of MCP and all these other items. And it's you gotta invest and you gotta get your tech teams, but more importantly, your business folks understanding and leveraging AI in an appropriate way that manages risk,
Uh-huh.
but it's going to be disseminated into the business and you already have people using it in the business. So how do you not stop them from getting the value out of it, but do it in a way that manages risk and the security of your company data and your customers?
So then do you think that like how we have cybersecurity awareness training, do you think there should be a different training for just AI or how to use AI in an organization, or should that be together with the cybersecurity awareness training?
I mean, I've taken the approach of combining them, right, in part of an education program where
Uh-huh.
it's not specifically cybersecurity or AI, but working with learning and development teams to figure out, okay, how do we appropriately train people, like how to stay safe? How do we manage our cybersecurity? A lot of that is still phishing training and those kind of items.
Uh-huh.
But I do think you have to start laying in AI training for people as well, because it's very easy to consume these tools. People can go, log in, register, pay $20 or not, and just use some of the free tools. And
Uh-huh.
each of those has an element of risk of compromising employee data or customer data or intellectual property, right? That has to be understood. You don't get that when you're looking at just the marketing material or hearing the hype. So I
Uh-huh.
think it's an obligation of the company to provide AI based training, right? In the same way that we do cybersecurity training, but that can also be a drain on time itself, right?
Yeah.
So trying to find that right mix, which is why I've looked at it as kind of in concert with the cybersecurity training and spreading it out and kind of doing a rotation between the two.
Mm, okay. Yeah, because like I could see the risk in users using the AI like Copilot or Gemini, right? So like, you're in Microsoft, you're already in it, and you're like, I'm writing this proposal and I'm doing something, and then it's going to Copilot, like, hey, Copilot, do this for me, blah, blah, blah. And then it might go into like if it's not secured, and like then the data might leak or there's so many risks in there that got to figure out the best way to use it safely, I guess, is what I'm.
Absolutely. And there's different ways to protect it, right? And most of the companies have paid models and enterprise, you had security features and those kind of items. But if people just go out and they start using Gemini, right, and they go to share something where they're doing, their prompts and upload data accidentally and they share it, right, or share it back to the model, right, you can lose company IP, which
Uh-huh.
then could erode trust and have a lot of the same damage as a more traditional like cyber attack could. And I think we have to think of it in kind of that way, which is predominantly education.
Uh-huh.
But I think people want to do what is right. They just don't know what is right or don't know where they're introducing risk to the organization. So we have to help them through that learning curve that, like we spoke about, is moving incredibly quick.
Now, considering the conversions of IT, OT, and data, how should a CIO or VP of IT reposition their department from a cost center function to a genuine growth engine and competitive differentiator?
I think from my seat, kind of leading IT organizations, it's really working with the business, understanding first what is going to move the needle, right? From a innovation, from a sales, from an enablement perspective, right? And then positioning the organization to help those teams accelerate the pace of their adoption of AI and other technologies. Legal professional or HR professional or marketing professional or sales professional, what you can do with AI is incredibly powerful and it's easier to use than previous technologies, right? You don't have to know how to write, Python or Java, right? Where you'd have to have specialized training to use it, right?
Mhm.
But IT is in a very good position to teach those organizations, like, how do you build an account plan using AI, help you do your research, help you break down that work that you need to do for every deal and opportunity, from lead to opportunity to sale to managing that contract on the back end. And how can we leverage it to accelerate those organizational imperatives? And instead of talking about how do we run the tool, right? Or how do we enable the users with OpenAI or Gemini or Anthropic, telling them more how they can apply it to their day-to-day workflow and providing that training. And yet, in some ways, I think of it as is getting to a spot where we're pair programming, but instead of two developers in IT, someone that brings the technical expertise, understands the risk, sitting side by side with that business person, right? Sales, marketing, whoever it happens to be, and helping them develop their skill around developing agents, integrating those into workflows, and understanding how it can reduce their toil, increase their throughput, and get a better quality product. Because I think a lot of AI, we talk about efficiency and effectiveness and doing more, but a lot of ways, I think it just helps us do what we're already doing better, more informed decisions, better access to the data. So it's really about partnering more with the business than ever before.
Yeah. And also with AI, prompting, learning how to prompt, right? It's a little bit easier than learning Java, right? Like it's so much easier to test prompting than it is to do Java, to learn what a variable is and syntax and whatnot. Like when I was learning how to code, is totally different from prompting, because prompting you can write whatever and then it'll show you something, and if it's not that you're looking for, you can tweak it. It's so much easier to tweak.
Absolutely. I mean, being able to converse with technology, whether we're
Yeah.
typing it or using voice, and have it kind of understand intent, it does very well. Now, obviously, training on prompting and everything is important, but it's definitely a much lower bar to entry than learning like a compiled language,
Right.
right? You did hit on testing, which is one of the areas where I think you at IT can certainly help people, because one of the things that you see in prompting and AI is people ask it one question and they get back an answer and they use that answer, right? And if you want something repetitive, how you prompt can give you very similar answers or very different answers,
Mhm.
right? So just understanding, oh, how do we iterate on prompting and think about our prompts in the way that you might like in software development and getting those end users, whether they be marketing or sales or HR or legal, to think about not only how do I prompt, but how do I test those prompts to make sure that I get something repeatable as I build that into an agent is definitely another skill where I think IT can lean in and support the business.
Yeah. Now, with when a technology vision is met with resistance from a functional leader, like let's say finance or legal, what is your go to framework for translating complex technical strategies into clear business centric value propositions?
So I'm a kind of a show it kind of person, right?
Mhm.
So if I run across someone that really has resistance to AI adoption, right? I try to have a good conversation to understand kind of what they're looking at. I mean, is it a CFO looking at financial metrics and doesn't believe the return, right? And we've talked earlier, it could be more of a soft return where it's just building a capability and a skill set within an organization that will be used in future endeavors, but where are they coming from? And then show them how the tool, right? It's one of the things with everything moving as quickly as it is to stand up a tool, build out an agent, automate a workflow. A lot of those can be done to a kind of minimum viable yet scenario very quickly.
Mhm.
And most of the time, you can carve off at least enough time and capacity to put something together that's demonstratable. And I think 20 years ago, we weren't really developing with agile kind of methodologies. And as we learned how to develop faster and better, the idea of that very iterative development came into place. And I think taking that same approach with AI, like let's spend 2 weeks, do one sprint, put something in place that we can talk to because it makes it a little bit more tangible. Most of the time, what I've found is people don't understand it because they can't touch it and it's too cerebral and they
Mhm.
don't necessarily understand where the value is. But if you can show them even enough to get the information kind of being processed in the head and get them thinking about the opportunities, then they start to see where they can apply it. And it might not even be the demo that you do, but there's a lot of capabilities out there. And the studies are showing you at 70, 80, 90% of people are only touching a fraction of what the capabilities of various AI tools are.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of the resistance and fear is from the unknown.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And also like, you know, some businesses like the if you're outside of technology, you don't really understand let's say where the cloud is, right? So you can say, "Oh yeah, this is on the cloud." So they're really like, "Where is that?" It's not on a server on-prem, it's somewhere in the cloud and you're like, "In the sky?" Like I've talked to individuals where they're like, "Where's the cloud?" I'm like, "It's a server." "Server where?" "In a data center." And they're like, "Huh?" Like they're still like not understanding that. But like I totally get it. I mean, they know what they know and we know what we know. So I totally get terminology wise and understanding what the world of IT and cybersecurity and AI, it's sometimes, the acronym, the super acronyms out there and all of the different terms is like a different language, right?
It absolutely is, right? And if you're in finance, you have your own kind of language,
Mhm.
right? Yet I have to spend a lot of time conversing with financial experts to understand the nuances, right, of that language, like AI technology, like computer vision, machine learning, right? You start talking about vector databases and you had IT personnel, right? And I've been guilty of this as well. We like talking about some of that technology in the same way a finance person likes talking about, kind of their area, but it doesn't translate very well between those different kind of organizational types and trying to get them to understand a very obscure concept of cloud. It's like, okay, it's a server in a data center, right? And we can't necessarily point to it. But when you hit salesforce.com and the GUI comes up, right? That's where it is. But you can't point to it or hand them something, which makes it a very abstract concept
Mhm.
to try to deal with.
Yeah. It's like earlier today, I saw a video clip where a professor came in and had like, a language professor that came in and talk to middle schoolers, right? And they have their own Gen Alpha language. And he's like maybe probably in his 30s, and he's like, okay, well, I'm here for a talk about languages. And you guys have your own language. So I'm going to try and have the speech in your own language. And then he started talking to them in Gen Alpha speak. And I was like, well, this is interesting. So I was like, I am glad there's a subtitles telling me what it is because I'll be like, what does this mean? Like, I was totally like, wow, that's different. Right.
It is one of my favorite use cases. We've rolled out, Copilot. We're mainly a Microsoft shop, right?
Hmm.
But the real-time transcription when on a Teams meeting or something, and then a sidebar, it's like, okay, what does that mean? Right. And helping translate it is one of the more, trivial but valuable use cases because
Yeah.
my kids are all a little bit older. And I have a granddaughter now that's kind of in that middle school generation. And I had to look up what 6-7 meant the other day. I'm like, where did this come from? It is a completely different language. So then you get IT talking to finance, talking to sales across got the 4 generations that are in the workforce right now, because you had some boomers in the workforce all the way to you got younger
Just
people
uh,
come out of high school, right, or first time jobs, and listening them speak independently feels like you're going from one country to another.
yeah. And I'm multilingual. So that's just like a whole nother set of language that I'm like, okay, do I need to know this language?
What happened to my language?
Exactly. Now, you've emphasized that successful digital transformation requires cultural evolution, such as the Gen Alpha language. What is the most common cultural barrier you see in established organization, and what is one of immediate actionable step an executive can take to dissolve it?
I mean, culturally, and a lot of different groups are very risk adverse. And I come from a technical background. I've been CIO, I've been CISO of some very regulated companies, and certainly cybersecurity in those areas. You need to be risk adverse.
Hmm.
But understanding what the true risk is and figuring out ways to say yes and adopt the technology at the right time and place requires a comfort being uncomfortable, where we're going to find lower risk items that we can experiment with.
Hmm.
And I think IT has gotten better about that over the years, especially with kind of agile kind of practices and development. Part of that is incremental delivery, but incremental risk, right? Let's try something out small, see if it works, make sure that we understand the risk around it. You talk to a seller, right? And if they present the wrong thing to a customer, that can really potentially blow up a deal, right? You certainly, if you were using generative AI to evaluate contract language, right, you're assuming some risk, right? So how do you keep those lawyers in the loop? Financial professionals are very risk averse for a very good reason, right?
Hmm.
So communicating with them and partnering with them of like, how can we try some of these things? How do we accept some risk and have a human in the loop to interrogate it, right? To make sure it's right. So we don't accept too much risk. Takes a mindset change, right? Because they've done the same thing in the same way for a very long time. There's been nuances and changes and different systems that they've used and some of those items, but you're asking people to step out of their comfort zone and change the way they work.
Yeah.
And that can be risky. So just getting the company comfortable with accepting mitigated risk with humans in the loop and understanding that even the initial deployments of AI, they might not show volumetric improvements in efficiency, right? They might not show quality. It might actually even take longer, right? Because you're going to run through a process twice, right? Once with your human system and once with AI to compare them, right? But as you get comfortable with it, you'll be able to see that flywheel effect take place and start to really see efficiency gains. Is a big cultural change, but
Mhm.
it's really getting people in a mindset where they can quantify risk, how they can mitigate risk, and how they can take small actions that make them feel a little uncomfortable and do something that might be a little bit scary in a way that still protects customer data, privacy, keeps humans in the loop, and all of those kind of items to help them get to a point where you can make greater and greater changes and drive efficiencies.
Now, I think that there should be a company called Humans in the Loop just for, like a second set of eyes for businesses because you kept on saying humans in the loop for AI, like making sure there's a human that's there to see. Okay, well, trust but verify the model, right? The AI model that they did something correctly. And then at that point, it's like the trust and verify thing is what I'm seeing the human in the loop company to go towards. Because you kept on saying it, and I'm like, that might be a good company name, like humans in the loop.
I'll have to look and see if that domain is for sale.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if there isn't something out there. There's actually a really good newsletter that gets published every week. I think it's called Human in the Loop.
Okay.
But I definitely think on the early stages of AI, that's the way to de-risk it, understand risk, right? Make sure it's doing the right things before you turn it over to
Completely too.
completely agentic workflows that allow things to happen. I think you get there
The more it's trained.
over time.
Yeah, over time.
Yeah, over time. And then you start sampling data, right, to make sure it's doing the right thing in a very similar way that you'd evaluate kind of employees, right, and pull a sample off of a factory line of was the widget manufactured appropriately, right? You get to a point where you're not checking every one, right, but it's never completely ungoverned. But certainly starting out with AI to de-risk it, making sure that those human systems
Hmm.
are able to validate that kind of work and partner with, which is where I think that the whole Copilot narrative, whether it's GitHub's Copilot or the whole Microsoft stack, it is really a good way of thinking about it, at least for those early AI use cases.
Yeah. Now, as the founder of Ohana Martial Arts Academy, what is the principle from martial arts training, like discipline, focus, or flow, that you found is directly applicable and highly effective in helping executive teams maintain clarity and strategic focus during a crisis?
Yeah, no, I've done martial arts for a very long time, and we opened Ohana Martial Arts, 7 years ago, and have been teaching students. And like what we always work with our students on is kind of the idea of slow to flow,
Uh-huh.
right? So start slow, increment your way into it, and try to smooth out kind of your motion in martial arts to be more efficient and more effective. And once you have flow, right, then you can work to speed, and then from speed you can work to power, right? That kind of disciplined thought process of how do we deconstruct motion, right, in martial arts to allow it to flow together very naturally, to where then we can speed it up as we get more proficient at those motions, and then put some power behind it. I think translates very well kind of into the boardroom, into executive speak, because it's like, no, let's take a step back. Let's think about our business processes and figure out what is the process? What does it need to look like? How do we make those processes in a way that we can generate flow, right?
Uh-huh.
Where we don't have these stop and starts, right? Where everything kind of moves in a well organized kind of structure. Once we understand the business processes and we have flow, then we can work on accelerating those business processes and get to speed. And once you have speed, you can really get to power. And power is really where you get to more revenue generation, right? And turning up the volume and deploying at more broad scale. So it's kind of slow to flow, flow to speed, right? Speed to power,
Uh-huh.
translated into workflow, right? Put together in a way that flow naturally, where you understand the data that comes out of one part of the system and is needed to make decisions in the next one, then really amplifying that up, which is a great use case for AI to get to speed, and then figuring out with this new speed, right? How can you use that to attack the market?
Okay. Now, with all of that said, there's the flow, the focus, and all that stuff. During a crisis, people are a little bit more, agitated. So how would that help during a crisis?
I think it slows everything down,
Yeah.
right? I forget exactly the acronym, but I have a handful of like pilot friends, right?
Mhm.
And they talk about like crisis drills, right? Obviously, if you're in a plane, right, and you get a bird strike, right, you get those kind of things. It's like, okay, what do you need to do, right? You got to fly the plane, then you gotta put it on course, right? Then you got to land the plane, communicate with others, right? Think in the middle of a sparring match or in martial arts, where you are in combat with someone else, the nature is for the heart rate to go fast, right? And beginning students, you see just start to flail, right? And they lose their form,
Mhm.
right? And lose some of the smoothness, right? And start to lose control of their breathing. But if you in business, fly in a plane, you get in a moment of crisis, take that time to take a breath, focus on those core components, your breathing, understand, okay, where was the breakdown in the system? Where can I get back to flow? How do I, get back to speed and really take a more formulaic look at
Right.
how to approach it can make things more clear. And if you have good flow in your systems, you know where the critical breakpoints are, right? And you can work around those constraints more easily, but it comes with practice.
Right.
And with AI, same thing with martial arts, flying a plane, you got to practice some of those failure scenarios. So a lot of it is, and you talk about this with cybersecurity and tabletop exercises. How
Right.
do you tabletop the business, right? If AI goes away, if the website goes away, if you had our ERP goes away, right? How do we respond? And intentionally practicing those is something I think, at an IT organization is uniquely positioned to help the business understand how those systems are used and how those breakdowns might happen so
Mhm.
that when they happen for real, like you're able to maintain a state of calm, right? But if it's the first time you've practiced, right, is in the moment of chaos, things really break down.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think but that's the thing also with practice, it takes time, right?
It
And
does.
everybody's always busy and then getting the team together to do a practice, and even if it's a live practice, do you really want to put down to mimic a outage, your website outage? Like how would you really mimic that, right? So it's just sometimes, yes, saying you need to practice and stuff like that is, yes, best practice, but then, also considering people's time, resources, feasibility are something to consider when we say practice. Because I would love to practice all the time about these, being in crisis, but then, how many time, like doing it once a year is not sufficient, right? Even a tabletop exercise every just one time a year is not sufficient. So now is then finding the right amount of time to do it. And is it tabletop sufficient? Or should we add something else to it? So there's so many variable
There
to
is,
that.
right? And I think of like Netflix and kind of their chaos monkey and continuous testing for failures, right? That's certainly kind of on the extreme.
Mhm,
And I think you could build that kind of into AI. But I think culturally, one of the things that you need to do is become a business that has that culture of learning, culture of experimentation, culture of testing, right? I
mhm,
certainly think for my businesses, I want to hold my partners and my suppliers to that because I need the supply chain to continuously be able to deliver. So I expect that from them. And I want to show up as the best company I can for my customers. So talk about how do you differentiate yourself as an organization, right? I think there's a real play there to show that you're going through these activities to make sure your AI is safe, but your systems are secure,
mhm,
right? That you know how everything in your organization works. You can respond to failures. You're exercising them because I think that's what allows you to show up for your customers as the best organization as you can, right? And
mhm,
I would hope that people think that their customers kind of deserve that. And I think as we get deeper into AI and we are able to free up more time from the humans in those systems, it will hopefully create more time that we can invest in better testing, better role playing, better scenario planning, right? To
mhm.
continuously allow us to get better.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Now, for the last question, if you had an advice to give to yourself when you were about 20, 25, what would it be?
So it's probably a little bit of a change in direction from AI, right? And those kind of items. But when I was in my early to mid 20s, I was working and had good jobs, was a technologist, and supporting my organizations the best that I could.
Mhm,
What I didn't realize until much later in my career was like I am a product, right? And I am bringing a service to market, right? I'm bringing to my employer. And that product continuously needs to evolve, right? And understand and learn, right? And you need to be very intentional in architecting like your career, your product, right? What you're bringing to market, right? And understanding where your product market fit is so that you can not only work for companies, but you can seek out employers and companies and businesses that align with your values. But I did not take enough time in my early mid 20s to really understand what was most important to me, right? What did I want to bring to market? How did I want people to talk about me and what I wanted my legacy to be so that I could actually architect, right, a career and architect what I brought to the market and how I showed up every day. I probably didn't learn that until I got into probably my mid 30s. And I think I could have made a few better choices earlier in my career if I would have thought about my employment and what I brought to the organizations I work for
mhm.
in a little bit different way back then.
Okay. Okay. Well, this is the end. It was a great conversation. I appreciate your time. So thank you.
No, thank you.
And I thank you to the audience for watching. See you next time.
See you next time.